November 16th, 1965. Walt Disney announces his plans for a new resort in Orlando, Florida, having become frustrated by the lack of space for Disneyland expansion in the city of Anaheim, California, as well as the seedy atmosphere that spawned around the park. Walt and his company began searching for space to start fresh in Central Florida. They attempted to hide their plans by purchasing the land in portions using shell companies. But as the media began to notice the large amount of land being purchased, speculation grew as to who was behind it. It wasn't long before the Florida public learned that Disney was working on a new project in their area, and they learned of these plans during very early development of the Disney World project. It was so early that it was tough for the company to describe exactly what the plans were, but with the truth unveiled, Walt held a press conference to reveal what he could about the new resort. In this conference, he announced the Disney World theme park, but he announced a second project as well, one far more ambitious and exciting than anything the company had ever previously attempted.
I'd love to be a part of building a model community as a city of tomorrow, as you might say. I'm not against the automobile, but I just feel that the automobile has moved into communities too much, and I feel it can design so that the automobile is there, but still put people back as pedestrians again, you see.
This is the public's first introduction to Walt Disney's Epcot project. Epcot stands for the Experimental Prototype Community of Tomorrow, a city built with community and innovation at the forefront. In the middle, there is a town center where companies would establish workplaces to employ the residents. These residents would live in neighborhoods and apartments stocked and designed by industry leaders, and the city would be flush with parks, walking trails, and community centers bringing the people together. Epcot would be enclosed in a dome and would rely on a monorail transportation system. It was a utopian and radical concept meant to serve as a blueprint for American cities.
Also, I've had in mind one community called Yesterday and the other one Tomorrow. Another reason to come here, they might come one time and they stay in Tomorrow, and their friends will say, "But have you stayed in Yesterday?" Then they'll have to come back.
Along with the city of tomorrow, Walt also mentioned a city of yesterday, but this was a concept rarely ever used following the press conference. It was mentioned almost for a laugh and hardly ever again. It was only because the press revealed Disney's involvement in the area that Epcot was being talked about publicly so early into development. This was an idea that was still formulating in Walt's mind, an idea he was determined to bring to reality. Walt was inspired by the industrial innovations of his time, from companies like Ford and General Electric. He had revolutionized animation, revolutionized amusement parks, but he wasn't satisfied. Walt wanted to do more than entertain the world. He wanted to lead it into the future, and his Epcot project was meant to do just that. It would be the new prototype for American cities, and cement his legacy as the next pioneer of American innovation. Walt's goal was to leave a legacy and create a lasting impact on his country. And while he was excited about Disney World, he was obsessed with Epcot. A year later, on December 14th, 1966, Walt lay in bed as his brother Roy visited him. Walt, still obsessed with the Epcot project, described the layout of his city of tomorrow, pointing to the tiles on the ceiling, using them as a grid to illustrate upon. He described neighborhoods branching out radially from the city's center, like the spokes on a wheel, always turning its citizens further into the future. Unfortunately for Walt, the future was not on his side. The bed Walt lay in was a hospital bed, as he had been diagnosed with lung cancer. Walt's obsession with legacy blinded him to the sad reality of his declining health, which was all too apparent to his brother Roy. The next day, on December 15th, 1966, Walt Disney would tragically pass away, and with him, his vision for Epcot, the city of tomorrow, died as well.
Speaking of cities adjacent to the Walt Disney World Resort property, there's a new town under construction called Celebration. The first residents are moving into townhomes, cottages, village and estate homes, and apartments in 6 architectural styles that, when blended with the town center, create a public experience, much the same as when you walk along Main Street in the Magic Kingdom Park.
Celebration is really Epcot, I think, in the end, in the sense of what Walt was looking for. A really nice place for people to really live real lives
We believe that has been created in Celebration. Every lesson ever learned from any master plan community in the country or throughout the world was studied in the design and development of this particular community.
We've dealt with cars in a positive way. We've dealt with garbage in a positive way, if you can say that. We've dealt with the way you live, the way you can live in a mixed-use environment with stores and apartments and houses and banks and post office all together in a walkable way.
But then, on August 1st, 1991, Disney announced a new project, Celebration, Florida. Celebration was a small town designed by the Disney Development Company. That was Roy Disney Jr., son of Roy Sr. and nephew to Walt Disney, as well as president of Walt Disney Attractions, Judson Green, and former CEO of Disney, Michael Eisner. Although they and others involved in the project would describe the town as a rebirth of Walt Disney's City of Tomorrow, in truth, it also resembles a foray into the close-knit community structures of the past, his city of yesterday. It was both a push towards the future and a celebration of the past. So welcome to Disney's Celebration. Chapter 1. Designing Community. In 1985, Peter Rummell became president of the new Disney Development Company, known as DDC. It was a branch of the company created to identify the potential of the company's land holdings and generate profit from them. When Rummell joined, there was one patch of land in particular that the company had interest in turning a profit on sooner rather than later. Most of the land that Walt had purchased in the 60s lay in Orange County, but a small portion at the bottom stretched into Osceola County. Walt's original plan for the Osceola section was for an airport of the future that would provide direct monorail transportation to the rest of the resort property. But like the original plans for Epcot, these never made it past the conceptual stages. Many in the Osceola government were interested in having Disney present in their county, feeling that they had missed out on the massive tax revenue boost that Orange had gotten. But after decades of the land sitting unused, Osceola began to consider other options. The land was actually a big swamp and had high environmental value. Rumors circulated that the county might condemn and repossess the land if it wasn't used soon. It is unclear if this was something they were actually considering, or if they just wanted to pressure Disney to hurry up and use the land themselves. Either way, CEO of Disney Michael Eisner recognized the urgency of the situation and knew he needed to make a move on the land soon. Quote, "It really came down to the idea of use an asset or lose it. Just to sit on the land didn't seem smart, and frankly, I was loath to sell it off for development when it was pretty clear what kind of development would occur on the land. You remember, we had some experience in the past when the company could not protect the land around Disneyland. I certainly did not want a repeat of that." Eisner hired Peter Rummell as president of the Disney Development Company. Rummell worked on a number of projects around the company, including the Euro Disney project. But Rummell also had his sights on that patch of land in Osceola, and more than that, he had a concept for it that was unlike anything the company had ever done before. A master planned community with a town center at the central hub, designed as a throwback to a time when communities were walkable and self-sufficient. As part of my research, I'd reached out to Peter to discuss his involvement and asked him about the experience of pitching Celebration to Michael Eisner.
It was a new idea. Walt Disney had the idea for Epcot, experimental prototype community of tomorrow, and the Epcot that you know today is nowhere near what he originally envisioned. And we were trying to kind of go back to that original idea. And Michael really liked that idea. He liked the idea of something adventuresome and something new and different.
Eisner approved the project in 1985, and Rummell reached out to his mentor, Charles Fraser, owner of the Sea Pines Company where Rummell had previously worked. Fraser was responsible for multiple large-scale real estate development projects, including the master planned community known as Hilton Head Island in South Carolina. Fraser was hired as a consultant for the Celebration project, known internally at the time simply as Disney's New Town. Fraser suggested building a school that would attract families to the community, which Rummell incorporated into the plans. Rummell also incorporated more walking and biking trails, taking inspiration from Hilton Head Island and its focus on wellness. In a previous interview, Rummell said, quote, "I figured out that learning and wellness were fundamental cornerstones for the place I had in mind." Rummell's designs in Celebration were created under a design philosophy known as neo-traditionalism, which focuses on a return to the pre-war neighborhood structure of more traditional town and neighborhood planning. It was a response to the rather disorganized post-war construction of the suburbs, where houses were placed next to each other without uniformity in design or structure. The idea of neo-traditionalism is to renew the sense of community and togetherness that was lost to suburban America through three main components. First is density. Houses should be close together, and communities should be somewhat walkable. Second, a focus on public spaces over private. Basically, more front yard space over backyard space, so the kids can play together and parents can visit each other on their front porches. As well as that, more public parks and community areas promote stronger community bonds. And third, control of appearance. Through a homeowners association, maintain the sense of uniformity that the community was designed with. In 1988, work on Disney's New Town stalled. Rummell and his team became preoccupied with projects such as Disney's MGM Studios and Euro Disney, now known as Disney's Hollywood Studios and Disneyland Paris, respectively. In 1990, the project resumed production. It was around this time that Eisner visited the offices of DDC and looked over the plans for a shopping mall concept, which was named Celebration Gardens. Eisner suggested that Disney's New Town be simply named Celebration, and the name stuck. Years after Celebration's announcement, it would often be compared to the original Epcot project that Walt had never gotten to complete. Both official marketing as well as the press sought to compare Celebration and Epcot, and there were some very key similarities. The design of Epcot was meant to remove the newfound American reliance on automobile transportation, designed with a central hub that monorails would take the workers to and from. Similarly, in the early years, Celebration was a highly walkable and bikeable community. Both concepts focused on public parks and open spaces that would promote community bonds. But the question remains, how much inspiration did Peter Rummell and his team directly draw from Epcot?
I think inspiration is too strong a word. We didn't pay a lot of attention to it, frankly. It very quickly became a theme park in terms of master plan. And so I don't think, my memory is we didn't learn a lot from Epcot.
I also spoke to Jerry Ray, who was hired by Peter Rummell to be the head of PR for the Disney Development Company. When I asked him the same question, he had a similar answer.
The concept of Epcot manifested itself in a number of pieces that were developed over the next, 30 years. And perhaps it's not even finished yet. If you go back to those original Epcot concepts, you'll see it manifesting itself in many, many ways throughout the complex. It's not just in that one place with the boundaries around it. Yes, Epcot is much more than that, and its Celebration is certainly a part of the new way of living, a new concept of living, which builds on the past. The whole idea is that it built on the past.
Making sure the project was distinct from the company's theme parks was important to Rummell and the team. Reportedly, Imagineers were at one point tasked by Disney to come up with a fictional backstory for Celebration. As a new settlement, which was built on former swampland, the land didn't have a culture that its new residents would be able to relate to. Imagineers came up with fictional backstories, such as one where the town rose, quote, from the ashes of General Sherman's march across the South. It's worth noting that Sherman never stepped foot into Florida, but it didn't matter because Rummell shut the idea down. The team wanted to create a real livable space where families could create their own history and culture, rather than create a theme park that people live in. In our interview, Rummell highlighted how important building a strong community was to him and his team.
I think it was huge. It was, and one of the lessons I'd learned is that community comes from physical location. It's how you put the place together, and particularly if you can make it walkable, so you don't have to get in your car to go to the grocery store. The other thing that makes it human is governance structure, club structure, and the things that can make people feel like not only they belong to something because they live on 8th Street in Celebration, but just a sense of belonging and a sense of being there. And so we had a pretty elaborate structure that adds to the sense of place that you create. And I think the combination of the two together is important.
Celebration was founded on 5 key cornerstones: education, wellness, technology, place, and community. And with those components in mind, the team was ready to unveil their plans to the public. Chapter 2: Announcing the Plan. On August 1st, 1991, Disney announced their plans for Celebration. The plan was for the town to initially house 20,000 residents in 4 neighborhoods known as villages, which surrounded the town center. Plans for a fiber optic network were also described, which would allow neighbors to send and receive info to one another, which was very innovative for the time. The shopping mall, now known as the Celebration Center, was also unveiled, and described as the then largest open-air shopping mall in Central Florida. Finally, they announced the Celebration Learning Center, the innovative public school for children, as well as the Disney Institute for adults, focused on offering social activities and educational classes. Despite the announcement in 1991, it wouldn't be until March 29, 1994 that ground would be broken in Celebration. This is when Celebration was officially founded, and that's why the year is shown on the town's logo. Although there was a delay between the announcement and construction, public interest did not wane as the years went by. Many people were interested in moving to Celebration, and many more were interested in keeping an eye on the project and seeing what happened. The media was particularly keen to watch for issues along the course of Celebration's lifespan, and the negative press over the years was something Disney would find themselves ill prepared for. But even under so much scrutiny, there was a massive amount of people interested in moving to Celebration. So many, in fact, that the Disney Development Company needed a plan to manage these people effectively.
Let the celebration begin!
So, on November 18, 1995, the company held a large event hosting around 5,000 people interested in joining the new community. A lottery system was implemented, where deposits of $1,000 were taken in exchange for the chance to live in Celebration. 5 lotteries were separated into 5 tents. One was for apartments, and the rest were for the 4 villages, or neighborhoods, available. These villages were named the Estate, Village, Cottage, and Townhomes. These were collectively known as Celebration Village, and were part of Phase 1 of construction. Upon winning, buyers were allowed to select their house styles: coastal, classical, colonial revival, French Normandy, Mediterranean, or Victorian. They also got to choose their house color: white, blue, yellow, green, pink, or pale beige. Color choices depended on the house style and whether or not houses near you had already picked those colors. 1,200 deposits were submitted. Some people submitted to multiple lotteries, hoping for the chance to win any of them. Prices were somewhat high and non-negotiable, as Disney was seemingly ready to return their investment sooner rather than later. It's worth noting that while the town square was actively being built at the time, the people were paying for homes that had not even begun construction. The sales office was in a prefabricated building, with the facade of a home on the outside. Despite the risk that these people were taking, many were overjoyed at the opportunity, and some went to great lengths to secure their future in Celebration. In the book Celebration U.S.A., journalists Doug Frantz and Catherine Collins described their experiences living in the town. Although they moved into Celebration during the second phase of construction, they interviewed those who were there at the lottery at the time. One resident had previously lived in New York, where it was illegal for him to be solicited with promotional materials regarding Celebration. This meant he would miss out on vital information regarding when he could try to bid to move into the town. Because of this, he illegally got a Florida's driver's license and bank account using a friend's address so that he could receive the information he needed. Others were less adamant about moving in. Another resident put his name in the lottery on a whim after skipping an event he had planned to attend nearby. He was interested enough to move in when he won, but less invested in the project than many others. I got to speak to one of the first residents, Jackie Flanigan, who told me the story of how her family ended up in Celebration.
My name is Jackie Flanigan, and my husband and I and our 2 daughters at the time moved to Celebration on August 7th, 1996. So we were very early. in Celebration. There's a fun story about how we ended up there, in that we knew we were moving to Florida and we had heard about this town, and we owned the Disney Vacation Club and we were Disney people. Well, interestingly enough, my husband took a position that made Disney his client. So obviously, in terms of location, when we moved, we needed to be close there because, Disney, when they needed something, they expected you to come. And just the convenience of not having to fight I-4 every day. So we were looking for someplace close. And then we found out about Celebration after the fact. And we're like, wow, that would be really cool. But we were quite certain it was way out of our price point. And then we found out about the lottery, that the people who lived in Florida had first crack at housing there. So we were like, okay, well, that's off the table. And then we found out that there was going to be a day that opened up, and anybody, as long as, anybody could purchase in Celebration. My husband, literally, I'm not kidding you, got on an airplane in Columbus, Ohio at 5:45 in the morning, some unholy hour, and flew to Orlando, rented a car, drove to Celebration, and was in line. He was the first or second contract that they wrote outside the lottery. And he called me and he said, we've just bought a townhouse. And I never saw it. So it's how many people would do that? Fast forward, we moved literally in August of 96. And I remember the date because it was literally the day after our anniversary. So anyway, being there in the beginning was just a little on the surreal. It was like you were embarking, you felt a little bit like a pioneer, that you were embarking on something new and unknown, but could be really awesome.
No matter how those first residents ended up at the lottery that day, and no matter how adamant they were about being a part of Celebration, every person who put their name down was taking a big risk. And with that risk came a feeling of uncertainty, but more than that, a sense of excitement and anticipation. Those who were there at the lottery often consider it to be a badge of honor, as the event has become a big part of the town's history and culture. This was the beginning of the community, as the people, perhaps unbeknownst to them, had created their first shared experience. Although Celebration was technically founded in 1994, it wasn't until June 18th of 1996 that the first family moved into their home. Many families, such as Jackie's, temporarily lived in apartments until their houses were completed. Construction on homes moved quickly, and many were completed that summer. On November 12, 1996, Downtown Celebration completed construction. This was known as the First Founders Day, an annual event held in the town. Attending the First Founders Day also grants bragging rights, as they were present for another piece of Celebration history. Michael Eisner was also in attendance at this event. On March 1st, 1997, Phase 2 of construction was announced, which included new neighborhoods known as West Village, North Village, and Lake Evelyn. But in the same year, many of those who heralded this project from the start began to leave the company, Peter Rummell and Jerry Ray included. And as they left, the company focused on securing profits even quicker, eager to fully return their investment. In the next few years, the town would experience some growing pains the company had not foreseen, and the media would soon draw attention to the problems. And as expansion began and construction continued, it would be the town's construction that would cause the first set of struggles for the community to overcome. Chapter 3: Cracks in the Foundation. November 18th, 1995, the day that the lots were sold to the first residents of Celebration. They were pioneers, brave volunteers for Disney's newest experiment. Some were Disney fanatics, some were simply looking for a change, but everybody was taking a chance on Celebration. June 18th, 1996. The first family moves into their new home, and many more would follow over the course of the summer. Families stayed in apartments, eagerly waiting for their houses to be ready, but some began to notice their stay in the rentals was taking longer than promised. Delays and construction issues meant families were stuck in limbo, growing increasingly frustrated. Slowly, people began to move in, as Phase 1 of construction moved into Phase 2. However, as the first groups of residents began their new lives in their new homes, They noticed that their houses were not meeting the high-quality standards that they were promised. New construction issues were being uncovered rapidly, almost every day. Some of these issues included non-functional outlets, drooping ceilings, doors without weather stripping, broken shower doors, hot and cold water lines being reversed, large bumps in their lawns, and more. Celebration USA covers a lot of the construction issues that the first and second phases held, and authors Doug and Kathy faced many of their own. One of the most glaring was when they discovered that their property line extended into their neighbor's porch. These were many of the minor issues, but there are more glaring and infamous examples of shoddy workmanship. One family discovered their house was not connected to the sewer system. Another visited to see the progress of construction on their house, only to find a crane had fallen into it. Multiple houses had porches built with supports that could only bear half the weight of the porch. And worst of all, one family showed up to find the workers trying to lift and rotate the foundation of their home without their permission after the workers realized they had placed the foundation at the wrong angle. We could keep listing off problems, but instead, let's focus on the question at hand here. Why was this happening? To answer this question, we need to get a little more specific about who was having these problems. There were two construction companies hired to build the homes, David Weekley Homes, as well as Town and Country Homes. You might have heard of these companies before, as they are well known and largely well respected. The problem was that these companies were not previously established in Central Florida and had to make the move especially for this job. Basically, how it works is, when a construction company is hired to build something, they hire subcontractors that they trust with the job. But if you haven't been working in the area for a while, you don't know who to hire or who not to hire. David Weekley anticipated this problem and began establishing relationships with subcontractors 2 years in advance, hoping to secure the contract with DDC. When they got the chance to work in Celebration, they were more ready for it, and their houses, by and large, faced less construction issues. Town and Country did not get the chance to establish themselves in the same way. They were based in Chicago, and DDC reached out to them for the job. They didn't get 2 years to establish themselves in the area, and therefore hired less experienced subcontractors who were ill-equipped for this kind of big project. Not to mention the time frame. From sale to the first family moving in, just 7 months. That's not a lot of time to build a neighborhood. And sure, these houses weren't custom, but construction was held to a very high standard. The Celebration Company, the team responsible for running the town, implemented the Celebration Pattern Book to guide builders and homeowners on the acceptable appearance for their home according to the HOA's stipulations. Cover to cover, this thing is 80 pages. So, what do you have when you hire two companies who are new in town, team them with subcontractors who can't handle the job, give them strict guidelines and high expectations, all within a time frame of, at best, a year? What you have is a problem. And it's a problem that the homeowners had to often, piece by piece, rectify and reconstruct themselves. And it shouldn't have been their job to handle. Those with Town and Country homes faced massive delays on moving in. And despite getting a head start, David Weekley received some complaints about the quality of construction as well. One resident decided to make her grievances known in a very creative manner. She took her car, covered it in lemons, and put a sign on the side that said, "David Weekley built my house." The sign further explained that her $400,000 home had floors so rough that they hurt to walk on, and invited anyone else to come visit and see for themselves. She then took her car and parked it in the town center for tourists and anyone else to see. In fairness, it's worth noting that some homeowners, particularly other David Weekley customers, were satisfied with the quality of their homes. In response to the lemon protest, one resident half-jokingly said, quote, "We're thinking of starting a campaign with signs that say, 'David Weekley built our houses and we loved them.'" Despite all of the trouble and controversy, most felt the construction issues were worth it in the end. In their book, Doug and Kathy summarize this sentiment. Quote, "Almost everyone we talked to in Celebration felt much the same way. The construction difficulties were troubling and annoying, but the end result was worth the woe. And there was an unforeseen upside to all of the consternation. The delays and the nagging problems people found once they moved in became a shared experience. While certainly not the backstory that the Disney Imagineers would have envisioned, these common problems resulted in a common vocabulary. There was a vitality and even humor to the conversations. Like residents of new towns and subdivisions everywhere, people in Celebration were eager to share the latest tale of woe and then offer one to top it. And actually, it's easy to see why they felt this way. Celebration, particularly its town center, was beautiful. DDC had assembled a team of world-class and esteemed architects to design each of the most important buildings in the community's centerpiece. Robert Stern was hired to lead the architectural vision, and he helped assemble the team.
What's amazing is that we got a lot of architects who in their work outside of work for Disney do very abstract and different kinds of work. And we got them all to agree to work within a framework of the American town.
The town hall was designed by Philip Johnson, the post office by Michael Graves, the bank by Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown, the movie theater by Cesar Pelli, and Stern himself designed the health center. The press was ready to call attention to all of the problems that Celebration was facing right out of the gate, and yet there was also a recognition of how special Celebration was. From Celebration U.S.A., quote, "Even as critics weighed in from around the world, the tiny town had been anointed the next great place to live in America, with more than 700 newspaper and magazine articles already written about it." Vincent Scully, Yale's esteemed professor emeritus of architecture, had decreed, quote, "Celebration is the most important thing happening in architecture. It marks a return of community." Professional Builder magazine described it as, quote, "the biggest experiment in real estate development," end quote. People across the country, for better or worse, had their eyes on Celebration. And as the town was becoming a community, they would face further tests, bigger challenges, and more scrutiny than ever before. Scrutiny that Disney was less than prepared for. Chapter 4. Narrative Control. There's no mistaking the fact that Celebration was an experiment for the Walt Disney Company. By founding the Disney Development Company, Eisner and management were testing to see if they could leverage the many real estate holdings of the company into short-term profits. And although Eisner, as he often did with projects under his leadership, did take interest in the creative aspects of Celebration from time to time, his attention was mostly elsewhere, on things like Euro Disney and Disney's America. For many of the residents, Celebration was a renewal for their families, a bright new chapter in their lives. But for Eisner and the company, it was a side project. And it was a side project that was proving more complicated than anticipated. Part of the reason is that the company didn't just choose to build homes and sell them off, but rather wanted to build an upscale community that could serve as a blueprint for future settlements. The company said as much a number of times to the press. Eisner was quoted as saying, "It will set up a system of how to develop communities. I hope in 50 years they say, thank God for Celebration." Likely they were hoping that these future settlements, which were inspired by Celebration, would also be owned by Disney. All criticisms aside though, the company was actually trying something, evident with how much effort they put into the design of the town. But they didn't just work hard on appearances. They were also working behind the scenes on maintaining control of the community so that its nice appearance would exemplify the perceived quality of the Disney brand. One of the reasons it became tricky to maintain control of Celebration was the fact that the company had to give up control at the very beginning of the project. What a lot of people may not know about the Walt Disney World Resort and all the company's holdings surrounding is that the large swath of land is enclosed within the Reedy Creek District. This is the company's own personal government system that allows them full legal control of their establishments within the region. They secured this control all the way back on May 12, 1967, but the process began all the way back in May 1959. Roy Disney Sr., Walt's brother, met with Florida government officials to pitch the company's plans, including Walt Disney World, and crucially, the original Epcot project. They showed the government the famed Epcot film, which showcased Walt detailing his plans for the ambitious project. When the officials heard of Walt's grand plans for a City of Tomorrow, they allowed the company to establish the Reedy Creek District in order to realize that vision. What they didn't know was that the company wasn't planning to make Epcot, at least not for a while. Walt had died at the end of the previous year, and without the project's visionary leader driving it forward, there was very little reason for the company to take such a massive risk on such a risky project. And yet, they still pitched it, pretending they were moving forward on Epcot in order to gain control of their holdings within the Reedy Creek District. But when Celebration was being developed, the company faced a problem. if they were going to allow residents to live within the Reedy Creek district, those residents would gain voting rights on things that happened within the district. That means they could jeopardize any future theme park construction projects. The company already had and has similar issues with Disneyland in Anaheim, since they do not hold their own district in California around that resort. So, in order to prevent any loss of control on their theme parks, they had to de-annex Celebration from the Reedy Creek district. All of that to say, they no longer had full governmental control of Celebration when it was established. So, at least in the company's view, if they lost control in the start, they had to find ways to get control back. Celebration would always be a representation of their company, and they knew the media would be watching closely. So, they established control of the community in a few key ways. First, they established a homeowners association and 2 community development districts, with boards elected by landowners. Since Disney still owned most of the undeveloped land at this time, they were the majority voice in all 3 organizations. And through legal maneuvering, as long as the company owned just one piece of property, they retained veto power over any decision in Celebration. They also exerted power to maintain the appearance of the town, as stated previously, through the stipulations of the Celebration Pattern Book, as well as the additional rules laid out by the Homeowners Association. Some rules were fairly standard for neighborhoods of this type. Stipulations over garden and lawn appearances, as well as not being allowed to park a recreational vehicle on the street. Some expectations were very specific though, like how all visible windows must have white or neutral colored curtains, or that independent house sellers cannot put up a for sale sign. But who was enforcing these rules? Well, that brings us to the second method of control, the Celebration Company. The company was created by Disney and positioned as the unofficial government, the responsibilities of which included enforcement of HOA policies. Brent Harrington was hired as the town manager and would publish a monthly newsletter with town information, often including topics regarding company policy and town expectations. He was sort of the pseudo-mayor.
One of the things when I first interviewed with the Celebration Company, this was essentially a quote that was shared with me. They said, "Our goal was to take the proven planning principles from the past and combine them with the best thinking of today to create a community for tomorrow." And that resonated with me as, okay, I get that.
But hold on, you might be asking yourself, how is a company in charge of town government? That's because Celebration itself, notably, is not a democracy. When Disney de-annexed Celebration, it became an unincorporated area. It's actually not a city, or under the umbrella of Osceola County's government. So, by and large, the residents do not have voting rights in the town. To be sure, there were a lot of rules and stipulations in place for those living in Celebration. But for those outside of the community, rumors and misinformation made life in Disney's city out to be insanity. Tourists would find Celebration on park maps and drive down to see what all the fuss was about. When they arrived, they would ask residents about the various rumors and misinformation they had heard about the town. Some of these beliefs that tourists held about the community were ridiculous and kind of funny, so let's quickly go over a few of them. False rumors about the town, which people really believed, included that residents had a strict dress code, that there was a limit to how many children residents were allowed to have, that ownership of homes reverts to Disney after 30 years. Side note, this is actually a mix-up with the Disney Vacation Club, which sells timeshares. That actors were hired to walk dogs downtown to make it appear more homey. That potential buyers were interviewed, vetted, and approved by the Disney Company. That the animals around Celebration were audio animatronics like the ones found in the theme parks. And finally, that there was a nuclear reactor hidden just below the town. Although again, side note, Disney technically has the power to do so within their district, but opted to build a giant solar farm instead. And again, none of these are true. Tourists increasingly began to see the people living in Celebration less as normal people and more as an exhibit or spectacle similar to those they left behind in Disney World. They would drive through neighborhoods at crawling speeds, watching the people. Some would stand on their cars and peek into yards. And reportedly, one couple took their curiosity a step further, going into somebody's backyard and asking the residents for a tour of their house. There was actually a very common misconception that Celebration was the shooting location for the fictional town Sea Haven from The Truman Show. Funnily enough, that town was actually Seaside, Florida, another master planned community about 6 hours away. But the perception from the outside was clear. They saw Celebration as an extension of the theme parks. Pristine, but ultimately phony. They expected to find houses painted on wooden facades, not homes that families were really living in. It was a perception the news was definitely running with, and one that residents were growing tired of. But although the ongoing trend of negative press was more than anticipated, the tourism issue was expected and planned for by the Disney Development Company. Multiple plans for the town were shelved to help curb the amount of tourism. The Disney Institute, an adult-targeted educational program, was moved closer to Disney World and outside of Celebration. The massive shopping mall concept was scrapped as well. The company had Celebration on park maps, meaning tourism was directed to Celebration, and particularly to the shops on Market Street in the town center, but the goal was to reduce it. This was a tricky balance to maintain, and some decisions frustrated the residents. Many of the shops were selling things meant for the tourists, while residents wanted local shops that were more practical, like for example, a local hardware store. When I asked Rummell about tourism in Celebration, he had this to say.
We saw it as a problem. We didn't want a town that was overrun by transients, people. But on the other hand, there were people who moved into Celebration because they wanted to be, either for the children or grandchildren, they wanted to be near Walt Disney World. And it's, people bought second homes and so on. But it was designed to be a place where people lived and spent 365 and not a tourist attraction. That may have been some of the reason why Disney Institute got taken out of it. Disney Institute became a bigger idea than it started with, and it was there may have been some concern that it would overrun Celebration.
Though the strict guidelines for homes and governmental structures were efficient methods for controlling the pristine appearance of the town, there was one more problem that Disney felt the need to solve: opinions and rumors. Celebration had a lot of rumors traveling through the community. One of the biggest ones was that Disney was planning to pull out of Celebration after facing so much negative press. The company certainly didn't help after they removed their name from the water tower at the front of the town. Previously, it had read Disney's Town of Celebration, but in the fall of 1997, an employee was instructed to paint Disney off the tower. However, Disney denied this rumor multiple times and tried its best to quell the controversy. But it's almost impossible to control people, their opinions, or what they say. Disney's dealings with people had usually fallen into two categories: employees and customers. It's fairly easy for Disney, like any company, to control their employees through things like dress codes, employee guidelines, and clear expectations. If someone steps out of line, you can have their employment terminated and replaced with someone that represents the brand better. With certain exceptions, Disney can easily control their employees. Customers are fairly easy to deal with as well. If someone likes your products, they will buy them. If someone likes your establishments, they will go to them. If they don't buy or they don't attend, someone else will. As long as your brand is never tarnished completely, if you're selling something people want, then people will buy. But suddenly, Disney had found themselves with long-term residents on property that they had marketed and sold. Some of the residents were Disney fanatics, while others could care less about the brand. But it didn't matter. All were tied to the brand. All of them had different opinions about the town, and all of them were talking about the town. And the media was listening. Disney knew they could not control these people's opinions about the town, or the rumors that circulated. So, how do you control a narrative? There was a final method used to control the narrative in and around Celebration. Rather than coming from Disney directly though, this last method was used by the Celebration Company themselves. It's a little bizarre, and I want to briefly cover it. So let's take a quick detour and talk about the third method used to control the narrative in Celebration: the Town Fathers. A quick detour. The Town Fathers. The Town Fathers was a group of 6 town leaders that secretly met to discuss emergencies and town controversies, talk about potential solutions, and unify their approach to handling these issues. The group was founded by Brent Harrington, the Celebration Company's town manager. The other 5 members were Pat Risley, pastor of the Community Presbyterian Church; Charlie Rogers, manager of the local bank; Kathy Johnson, leader of the Celebration Foundation, a local charity; Terry Wick, an education expert working with the Celebration School; and Dot Davis, the principal of the Celebration School at the time. The existence of this group and its goals was largely meant to be a secret, and most of the town seemingly did not know it existed. This makes sense, since internally, the town's main source of news was the monthly newsletter, which Brent Harrington and the Celebration Company put out. So if the celebration company didn't want people to know, it would be easy to leave residents in the dark. The goal was to unify the people in charge of the town's 5 cornerstones: education, technology, health, community, and place. Although health seemingly didn't have much representation, the other 4 were mostly covered. Now, it's unfair to say that this was a method Disney themselves used to control the narrative in Celebration. Any idea that they may have directed the Celebration Company to create the Town Fathers would be pure speculation. Very little is known about the group. I only found out about it in my research from Celebration U.S.A., as Doug Frantz and Catherine Collins discovered the group after seeing them meet together at the nearby golf club's restaurant. Other than that, seemingly nothing else has ever been reported about it, and unfortunately, I was never able to speak with anybody who was a part of it. It's also not unusual for a town leadership committee to exist, meet, and discuss town matters outside of the public eye. It's actually a good idea, because if one group is having trouble, the remaining 5 members can help direct their resources to best aid the town and its different components. What seems weird, though, is the fact that it was kept a secret. It's also worth noting that not everybody wanted it to be a secret. Kathy Johnson reportedly said she wished it was public. If part of the group's purpose was to identify and quell rumors before they got out of hand, it seems weird to keep the existence of the Town Fathers a secret, since that could become controversial itself. So, while the existence of the Town Fathers cannot directly be attributed to Disney, it may be fair to say that their purpose and goals align with those of the company. The Town Fathers mainly focused their attention on issues with the town's public school. Dot Davis was actually the school's 2nd principal. The first principal, Bobby Vogel, had only stayed as head of the school for a year, and that was hardly the only challenge the school faced. In only 2 years, the school had become the most controversial talking point between residents, with tensions rising so high that they threatened to destroy the town's newfound sense of community. So now, let's dive in and discuss this Celebration School. Chapter 5: The Celebration School. When crafting the plans and concepts for Celebration, there was a clear desire from the team behind the project to go the extra mile. The master plan community is a concept of living that people like Peter Rummell have been trying to innovate on for years. Celebration was meant to be the next generation of the planned community, but in order to push the community aspect of a town, you have to do more than build neighborhoods. You have to design a town in a way that people naturally gravitate to the same areas, like the town center, the parks and walking trails, and of course, for families, the public school. Celebration was made with families in mind, and while it would have been easier to let the children all get shipped off to the regular Osceola public schools, easier wasn't good enough for the team behind Celebration. They wanted to rethink what a community should look like, and with the Celebration Learning Center, later renamed the Celebration School, they wanted to reconstruct K-12 education from the ground up, creating an environment that enhanced the learning of the children who entered it. Although Rummell and his team made it clear that any direct inspiration drawn from the original Epcot project was minimal, it's worth noting that Walt himself had education in mind in the early days of his project.
I'd love to be a part of building up a school of tomorrow. This might become a pilot operation for teaching aids that could go out across the country and across the world. It's a great problem today, the one of teaching.
Walt saw the public schooling system as an inefficient means of educating and preparing children for adulthood. And in designing Celebration, Rummell and the team likewise saw the opportunity to make the Celebration School into a blueprint for modern education. To do this, DDC assembled a team of education experts from across the country. These included Howard Gardner and Lois Hetland of Harvard, David Johnson and Roger Johnson of the University of Minnesota, and William Glasser, psychologist and acclaimed educational improvement author. Stetson University also partnered with the town to create the Celebration Teaching Academy, a program meant to train teachers in the town as well as around the world in the innovative methods of education that the Celebration School was implementing. To the team of acclaimed educators, the American public schooling system was failing to create the proper environment to maximize the learning capabilities of students, and the plan was for the Celebration School to remedy these problems and serve as a guide to schools across the country moving forward. The structure and curriculum of the school was vastly different from public schools around the world, as planned by the team of educators. Here was the basic setup. The school would be K-12, as research indicates there are benefits to siblings being in the same school. Classrooms would be 3 to 5 times the size of a standard classroom. Each classroom would be known as a neighborhood and would house around 100 students each. Each room would have around 4 teachers, known as learning leaders, and these instructors would be responsible for teaching the students all subjects in the same room. The neighborhoods would combine a few grades together, and the school was split into K through 2, grades 3 through 5, grades 6 through 7, grades 8 through 9, and grades 10 through 12. Students would typically gather in different areas of the rooms to do different subjects at different times of the day, and teachers would split subjects according to their own expertise. This structure was loose, and it was meant to be. Much of it was built upon Howard Gardner's belief that children learn differently from one another at different speeds or in different manners, and that this structure would help cater to each child best. Throughout the school year, learning leaders would meet with parents and their students to discuss each child's personalized learning plan. This was a guide map customized to each student that was meant to track their education throughout the year and push them to work to their full potential in the ways that work best for them individually. Students were given quite a bit of flexibility in their daily schedule to get their assignments done, encouraging personal accountability. And their assignments would often be learning projects that incorporated a variety of subjects like math, science, and history, teaching the students to apply the skills they were learning. Rather than traditional testing, the team of educators created the Authentic Assessment, which was a rubric that would evaluate each student's abilities and learning progression over time. Each quarter, students would make a portfolio detailing what they learned, and authentic assessments would be used to evaluate the effort put in and the quality of the work. This, of course, meant no letter grades. Report cards would instead say things like, not yet, in progress, proficient, or achieving. They would also include more personal details regarding each student's learning progress, so that parents would ideally know where their child was at in their education. In a lot of the marketing for Celebration, it was showcased as a town on the forefront of technology. Most of that was found in the school, with one example being the Mac computers, which housed digital textbooks and software for writing reports. That's all very common in schools now, but in the late 90s, it was a big deal. But let's take a step back, because a lot of these elements, such as no letter grades or group classrooms, were present in other schools at the time. But while you could certainly find these methods in other schools, it was rare to see them all implemented at once. This was definitely an experiment, but it was one that the education experts behind it believed in, and it was a concept that many of the teachers were excited for as well. In my research, I got to speak with 2 former Celebration School teachers, one of which was Dr. Tom Vitale.
I started with Celebration back in 1996. I got hired, I honestly can't remember if it was May or June, but it was the summer before the school opened for the first time. And then we spent the next month, 4 to 6 weeks just kind of preparing for the school to open. That first year it opened in its temporary facility. And that was where my involvement began with them.
Another teacher I got the chance to speak to was Jackie Flanigan, who appeared earlier in this documentary talking about her experience moving into Celebration. Jackie had a unique perspective on the school, because she was both a teacher and a parent with 2 kids enrolled.
We looked at a lot of different schools and felt like, the more I read about what the school was going to represent, the better I liked it. I was an educator myself. And I thought, this is really awesome. So school started. We moved into our apartment because our townhome wasn't going to be built for a while. They went to school there. I started volunteering there. A teacher she resigned. It wasn't a good fit for her. And it's kind of hard to hire teachers on the fly. And I was there, and Bobby Vogel, the principal, hired me for the position. And because my own kids were there and I believed in what they were doing, I thought this is really the way education needs to go.
Of course, not every teacher meshed with the school's unorthodox structure. This was a brand new school trying a bunch of new things at once in classrooms with 100 kids each. It was a learning curve for not just parents and students, but teachers as well. Reportedly, one award-winning educator was quoted as saying, "I'm not qualified to teach in a school like this, I just know chemistry." I asked Tom about his experience handling so many students at once, and he explained how his neighborhood worked.
So we looked at it, we said, okay, we have 100 kids. Here are the K2 kids. And so, we had, say, just roughly 50. We tried to be like, when they were assigning kids, tried to make it half primary and half intermediate. So then we had the 2 primary teachers look at those roughly 50 kids. And then me and the other teacher would look at roughly the other 50 kids. And what we'd start the year by doing is getting some baseline assessments on all the kids, right? Where are they in reading, in math, and things like that. And then we would just start breaking out into ability level groups. So I might teach a math class that had third, fourth, and fifth graders all in the same little group. So it was based on, okay, well, this is the skill that we're going to be focusing on and teaching. These are the standards. And based on our assessments, these are the kids that need to be focused right here. And so all of our groups would be based like that. And then we would just kind of negotiate amongst each other who was going to do what groups.
The school was trying a lot of new educational concepts at once, and making them all work together was going to be a challenge. To help the teachers get better prepared to teach in such an environment, Disney created an enhancement fund of $10 million that allowed the teachers to travel around the country and attend numerous professional development events. Disney had also provided some of the funds needed to build the school and also donated the land. There were also small perks that came with being a part of a school pushed by Disney. I wrote to another teacher, Rene Castillon, and she wrote back, telling me about a time she was able to take her French students to Epcot, allowing them to practice their language skills while ordering food at the French Pavilion, which provided a level of immersive learning that may have not been otherwise possible. But despite the excitement for the new school shared between parents, students, and teachers, there was one glaring issue. The school hadn't actually been built yet. For the 1996 school year, the students and teachers were crammed into the much smaller Celebration Teaching Academy, which meant the teaching academy itself had to be put on hold until the school was built. And already in the first year, some parents began to take issue with the unorthodox format of the school. Particularly, parents of high school age students began to worry that colleges wouldn't accept them since they didn't have letter grades. Parents with younger kids complained that their children, crammed into rooms with 100 kids at a time, weren't getting the attention they needed to properly learn at crucial developmental stages. Teachers were scrambling to make this unorthodox curriculum work and stick to the school's plan, while also trying to meet the needs of parents and their students. The small building was becoming a pressure cooker, and parents were growing increasingly frustrated. In response to these problems, Brent Harrington and TCC scrambled to organize pep rallies and events in support of teachers. They used these events to raise money, and then funneled that money into an ad hoc group known as the Positive Parents, who would then use the funds to create other events in support of teachers. It was a noble effort to raise morale at a time when the town was beginning to struggle, and there were many parents who held strong in support of the school, believing that with time, the structural kinks would be worked out. But by creating the Positive Parents group, TCC had possibly helped cause a bigger problem. Those parents that had concerns and criticisms had many fair points about problems with the school that needed to be addressed. But by labeling some parents as the positive ones, TCC had drawn a firm line in the sand between those fully for the school and those fully against the school, when that hadn't really previously been the case. Now, the Celebration School had become a controversial subject in the town, and the community was beginning to divide. Now, we've talked about the involvement of parents, teachers, and TCC, but before we go any further, let's identify a silent fourth party that caused some of these issues: the realtors selling the homes. What I didn't previously know was that some of the realtors themselves were making promises about the school that they had no business making.
So the school was a big draw, right? Everybody wanted to be in school. It's a Osceola County public school, but in partnership with the Walt Disney Company, right? At the time, that was unheard of. And of course, Disney's a big name. So it was used as a selling point for the community. Hey, come live here. It's a great community. We're, connected to Disney, but look what Disney's doing with the school, right? And so the realtors were using the school as a marketing point to sell homes. And they would say things to people to buy homes that weren't necessarily true. Some of the things we heard, and I'm sure Jackie probably told you this one, but we had parents that thought that the monorail would be connected to the school and the kids would be able to jump on the monorail at the school and, take it to Disney and go back and forth, and just really ridiculous, crazy stuff like that.
And I can tell you, because we were homeowners in Celebration. We lived there. Our kids went to school there. And I taught there. And that's a good portion of pressure on that school was relative to how the houses were being sold. You had these builders, and families would come and they, see the models, and they would work with their builder. These builders were promising things, and we didn't know this until it was too late. It was like their mouths were writing checks that we couldn't cash as a school.
And we didn't find out about it, of course, until after it had been going on for probably almost a year, because that's, when the parents start to get angry is when you find out about it, because you're sitting in a conference and they're like, and they're banging the table. We were told X, Y, and Z. And Jackie and I, we would look at each other and be like, well, who the hell told you that? And they're like, when we were talking with, realtor what's it? We were, told this or we were promised that. And then that's when we started to put together and we're like, wow, that's nuts. I mean, that's nuts.
This was a massive learning experience for everyone involved, and it was clearly going to take some time before the system began functioning correctly. Jackie and Tom were very open about certain things they wished they'd handled differently.
I think defining what progressive meant was not done well. As an educator, I know progressive means not doing it the way it's always been done. That's a loose definition, but I think families moved into this community because it was like Norman Rockwell. It was Main Street in the Magic Kingdom. And then you get to a school that looks nothing like the school that they went to. And the teaching was nothing like what they'd experienced. So there was this sort of internal weird battle between, I think they believed that progressive meant all the desks, the textbooks, everything would be new. It would be the newest version of everything they had when they were kids.
What we did wrong in retrospect was we changed everything about what school meant and looked like. What, when you close your eyes and picture K-12 schooling, right? You went through K-12 school, you know what it looks like. Your friends went through it, you've seen it. And then they dropped their kids off and it looked different, right? It looked different. We didn't have individual chairs. We had tables. Kids were sitting in groups. We didn't necessarily have classes in that neighborhood. We would pull small group and do small group instruction. And instead of having like basal readers, it would be, we would be reading novels, but we'd have a group of 5 or 6 kids reading this novel and a different group of 5 or 6 reading another one. And we would basically have book talks. And that's what we were doing. And so we changed everything at once. And we didn't talk to them about that we were doing that, right? We just kind of assumed everybody knew because we were out there saying, hey, it's all different. We're going to be great because we're different. But we didn't explain to them what was different and what to expect. Like if when you go to a doctor, when you go to the hospital, you expect to see a doctor wearing a white coat with a stethoscope around his neck, right? If you walked in and he was wearing, flip-flops and, a swimsuit and, and a tank top, you would probably be like, I have cancer. Could I see a different doctor? Right. And this guy might be the best in the world, but you changed what it meant to be, in a hospital looking at a doctor. And I don't think we did a very good job. In fact, no, we didn't do anything to kind of prepare parents and teach them about what to look for.
The promise of a brand new school was listed as a top reason for why people moved to Celebration in the first place, with around half of the resident families having school-aged children. And actually, many of the parents were looking for a new place to live specifically because their kids were not succeeding in the schools they were already in. Many of these students had been labeled problem kids by their previous schools because of learning difficulties they had. And actually, a school with the format of the Celebration School often works for kids who don't function well in traditional educational environments. But the problem was with expectations. They were all over the place. And as time went on, parents were dividing further on what kind of school they wanted the Celebration School to be. I was lucky to get the opportunity to speak with Andrew Ross, an educator of over 45 years who has written for the New York Times, The Guardian, The Nation, and more. Andrew lived in Celebration during its early years and occasionally taught in the school. His time and experiences in the town were documented in his book, The Celebration Chronicles, and he also studied the Osceola housing crisis surrounding Celebration in his book, Sunbelt Blues. His research was invaluable to this documentary, and I was very happy to get the chance to speak with him and particularly learn about his involvement in the school. When I asked him about the divisions in the town over the schooling, he had this to say.
One of the problems is that, Disney's a developer and Disney has a high reputation for customer satisfaction. I think there was that kind of consumer mindset of a lot of folks who moved into town. Schools don't work that way. Education doesn't work that way. You don't see, I'm speaking here as an educator for more than 45 years. Sometimes what you teach in classroom, you really don't see the impact of it until 10 years after in students. So I've learned not to expect to see short-term results, but with a consumer mentality, that's what you expect. You expect to get, to be able to see those results immediately. Schools don't work like that. Celebration School, as it was set up, was certainly not designed to work like that. And I think that was part of the problem.
By the end of the first school year, 6 out of 19 teachers had left the school. Bobby Vogel, the principal, also resigned, and left with the suggestion that the upper and lower schools be separated. Reportedly, the school planned to hire 2 principals to replace Vogel, perhaps indicating that they were planning to take her advice and separate the grades. But the problem was the budget. This was a public school, and since they only had the funds that Osceola County granted them, they couldn't afford 2 principals. Besides, that went against the vision of the original plan of the school, that kids would go from childhood to young adulthood, learning along with their siblings in the same school. The first year hadn't gone well, but it didn't mean that the intent and the vision of the school was completely flawed, but instead, perhaps the curriculum and structure needed more time to develop. As the 1997 school year began, the students and teachers were able to start fresh in the brand new Celebration School building, and a new principal named Dot Davis was hired to lead the school. But it was clear that Disney and TCC were rushing to patch the issues and stop the PR nightmare that the school had become. In fact, the hiring of Dot Davis was a great example, as according to Celebration U.S.A., the process was extremely rushed. Davis had been the principal of the Academy for Academics and Arts in Huntsville, Alabama for 13 years. During her tenure, she transformed the school, bringing it from a low-performing institution to one formally recognized as an outstanding school by the Department of Education. After working at the school for so long, she was considering retirement until she happened to come across the job listing for the Celebration School principal. She applied on a whim and didn't hear back until 2 months later, when she received a call from a TCC representative. She was interviewed on the spot and asked a bunch of personality-based questions, including things like, "Can you remember a time when you were the life of a party?" and "What is your most embarrassing moment?" She didn't hear anything for 3 weeks, until she received another call with another impromptu personality exam. She was selected as a finalist, and a week later flew down with her husband for an interview. While she met with Brent Harrington and the school staff, her husband examined the town, deciding that there was nowhere for them to live and the prices were just too high. The next day she met with some of the educational team working behind the scenes, including Larry Rosen from Stetson University, Terry Wick, the liaison between TCC and the school, and Thomas McCrawley, school superintendent. They interviewed her for 15 minutes, then stood up to leave. When Davis stopped them to ask some questions of her own, they said, quote, "You may ask one question as we walk out." As Davis and her husband were about to leave, a teacher received a call from McCrawley, the superintendent. The teacher hung up and turned to Davis to inform her she got the job. Davis called McCrawley back and found out he was already preparing a press release to announce her hiring, even though she had not accepted the job yet. She asked for more time to consider it over the weekend, and also mentioned that she needed to tell her current supervisor if she was taking the job. That's when McCrawley informed her that he'd already called and told Davis's supervisor that she was taking the job. Despite everything, by the end of the weekend, Davis decided to accept the new position and attended a grand press release where she was given a key to the school. Teachers also walked across the stage, wearing football jerseys with their names on them. New teachers were announced as first draft picks, and teachers that stayed from the last year were announced as returning players. It was a big spectacle, but behind the scenes, things were clearly still chaotic, and parents were not fooled into believing all of the problems were solved. Some parents had already tried to leave the town during the first school year, but they discovered a roadblock preventing them from doing so. In the contracts they had signed when buying their homes, there was a clause preventing residents from selling during the first 9 months. There were a few exceptions if residents could prove hardship, like a divorce or a job transfer, but problems with the school were not a valid reason to leave. This backfired when parents tried to leave, Disney said no, and parents went to the press and started whistleblowing. Disney quickly backpedaled, offering homeowners an NDA preventing them from criticizing the town and school in exchange for the freedom to leave. The town had already suffered a lot of negative PR, and many of the residents weren't having it anymore. After all, the school was the reason many had moved there, and those still in staunch support of it began to react strongly to criticism. The positive parents got heavily involved in the PTSA, forming a group known as the Dream Team within that stood firm in their undying support of the school, prompting the occasional shouting match between them and those with criticisms. Soon, some neighbors stopped talking to one another, and teacher morale reached an all-time low. A boiling point was reached once the press started approaching students, forcing children to defend their school. In response, a local PR firm was hired by TCC, and all further questions regarding the school were directed to them. But the owners of the firm also had children in the school, complicating their feelings on the matter. And they weren't the only ones in that position. Many of the higher-ups at TCC had children in the school, and some of the teachers did as well, including Jackie Flanigan.
I lived within walking distance of the school. My kids and I walked to school every day. It was difficult because I did believe in the system. I did. I wouldn't have put my kids there if I didn't, and then on top of that, I also recognized that we had a lot of work to do. The teaching design and the implementation of it were deep in the research. I mean, it was the right way, in my honest opinion. Did it have flaws? Yes, it did. It demanded an awful lot of the teachers, and there were lots of those kinds of things that had to be worked out. The easiest way to describe it is, I'm sure you're aware, we had university partnerships. We had universities that were involved. One of the universities was Harvard. I can recall very vividly, they used to have, it was required, I guess it still is in Florida, they were called school advisory councils, SACs. That's what they were called. And it was like an advisory group of families and stakeholders that they weren't a board, they had no governing power, but they would advise. So it would be weird because in that first couple of years, we were still getting a lot of input and training and oversight by those university partners. And so they would come from wherever. One of Johns Hopkins was one, UCF was a big one, big partner because they were local. Harvard was one, Stetson was a partner in collaboration with UCF. Auburn was the other one. So these were respected universities, and they would come in and they'd spend all day in the school, and they'd be in our classrooms, and they'd meet with us and do a training or whatever after school, and telling us we were way ahead of where they thought we would be, and we were doing such a great job, and they'd give us pointers on how to make this better or how to do this more efficiently, and this is wonderful, and taking pictures and notes and all of that. And then one particular time, happened to be they were there on the same day that we had a SAC meeting, and we had to have a police escort. That's how riled up the parents were. So we would go from hearing, you're doing fabulous, this is what you should be doing, this is the way direction school needs to be, blah, 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 to you're ruining my kid's life. So it was a little like whiplash. And the hard part for me is like, why would you think I would do this to my own child?
Tensions were reaching an all-time high. During one PTSA meeting, Larry Rosen, the representative from Stetson University, said that he believed the problems could be attributed to not enough training and too few teachers. In response to this, one parent stood up and exclaimed, quote, "We blame you, Larry Rosen, for all of this. You and Dot Davis." He also added one final jab, saying, quote, "Larry, you are the cancer." It's worth mentioning that Rosen also had a child in the school, and surely wanted it to succeed as much as the rest of the parents. Although things were getting nasty between parents and faculty, there was increasing cause for concern. High school seniors were having serious trouble getting into colleges. One parent spoke to a representative at Auburn University, who told her, quote, "Ma'am, you are being grossly misled regarding portfolios. You need grades." Auburn University, by the way, was also involved with the Celebration School. Somehow, despite all of the interesting and potentially beneficial ideas the educational experts had implemented into the school, they had forgotten to consider what the next step for graduates would even look like. In response to this, the teachers had to do a rush patch job, sometimes providing fake grades and credits for classes students had never officially attended. This raised ethical concerns, but also educational concerns. If a student receives credit for pre-calculus, but never took it, how can they possibly succeed in a college calculus course? But really, the teachers can't be blamed for trying to fix the problem, since through the end of the second school year, the higher faculty and administration had not made any progress themselves. These were immediate concerns, and the future of the students was at stake. And with a seeming lack of effort from administration to fix the problems, suddenly the strength of the positive parents began to wane, and a new group known as the Concerned Parents of Celebration formed. They first met in a hotel on the outskirts of town. Since criticism of the school had been met with such swift hostility in the past, there was a real fear of being outed for attending the meeting. About 50 parents met that first day, and compiled a list of 30 concerns into a document. They met with Davis and presented these findings. Davis expressed support for many of the ideas listed, and after that first meeting, the Concerned Parents group grew from 50 to 150. Oddly enough, the problems with the school, which had initially torn the town in half, was the unifying cause that brought most people together. In the fall of 1998, big changes came to the Celebration School. A more traditional class schedule was implemented. Honors and AP classes were also introduced, as well as an elective for SAT preparation. Traditional textbooks were reintroduced, and the reliance on digital textbooks through school computers was reduced. And, most crucially, numbered assessments more equivalent to grades were introduced. Most of these changes were implemented in the upper grades at first, but it was a start. On top of that, many of those in administration who were behind the initial vision for the school were demoted, let go, or left on their own. Davis insisted that these changes were all in the works before the concerned parents presented their concerns. And that may be true, but either way, it was a massive win for those who wished to return to traditional schooling. The fate of the Celebration Teaching Academy was even more bleak. The academy was created in partnership with Stetson University and TCC, but differences in goals for the academy led to more and more delays. TCC wanted it to focus primarily on training the teachers at the Celebration School, while Stetson wanted it to be used for training teachers nationwide as initially promised. Eventually, the building was split between Disney and Stetson, with Disney using it for administration offices, while Stetson briefly offered adult educational classes. And soon after, an even bigger change was announced. In fall of 1999, Celebration School would become K-8, and high schoolers would move to a new school being built 2 miles away. Those formerly known as the positive parents in the PTSA were dumbfounded and upset, and many leaders in the group left the town. Many of the teachers were upset as well. After all, the school at this point was basically a normal public school. What was the point of fighting for the future of the Celebration School if it ended up no different from any other public school? Even worse, many of the students were not happy with the massive overhaul of the school structure. Remember, a lot of these kids had learning disadvantages, and many were actually really connecting with the curriculum and loose structure the school offered. When they found out the school was becoming more traditional, many feared it would become just like the schools they had struggled in previously. It is understandable why many parents were unhappy with the school. They had been promised various things that never came to pass, and their children were in some ways guinea pigs in a grand educational experiment. But at the same time, it could be said that if given more time, perhaps the Celebration School could have worked out the bugs in their initial plan and pushed to remain the innovative and unique institution that it was intended to be. When I asked Jackie Flanigan, Tom Vitale, and Andrew Ross if they agreed, here's what they had to say.
I struggled with that a lot because I did believe in it. I still believe in it. I still believe what we were doing. In fact, there are probably those people that you've talked to that have said things like, how did Celebration fail? Or they'll use the word fail as they talk to the original design of the school. And myself and others teachers who were there at that time will say it really didn't fail. It succeeded for a really short time.
But when you look back at some of those kids that we had for, those first 2 years, and you look where they are now and what they're doing now, so many of them will still to this day talk about their experiences at Celebration School and how that impacted their educational journey, and that it made a difference, and that it really taught them to think. I mean, I've been in education for like 32 years now, and I haven't had other kids come back 10 years, 15 years, 20 years later and talk about that. with their, traditional public school experience. I mean, they may talk about a teacher, or they may say, hey, when I was in your class, this thing really inspired me, but they don't talk about their education as a whole that way. So I think that was a big success. I wish we could have held on to our concept longer.
I think it definitely deserved more time. And in general, I got to know the teachers quite well and had a lot of respect for what they were doing. And I learned a lot about education while I was there. That was not possible for all sorts of reasons. One had to do with the scrutiny that the town was under. Celebration was very closely watched. Been more stories written about it than any other town in America. And so, for sure, the school was at the center of many of those stories. Disney is, like most corporations, is very, risk averse and acts to protect exposure to its brand. And so stories in the press that were damaging to the brand had to be addressed in some way. And there were a number of ways in which the company did that. One of which was, I think, to revert the school.
Certainly, the Disney Company was unhappy with the negative media attention that the school had prompted. But more than that, Celebration as a whole, which was initially poised to be an easy moneymaker for the company, had proven to be more complex than anticipated. This was unlike any project they had worked on previously, because they had to contend with real people with real opinions. And when their opinions of Disney or its work in the town were less than desirable, they had the ability to make those opinions known in the press. Disney, despite their efforts, could not control Celebration, because the town was a growing community of individuals, and people aren't easy to control, silence, or sway in your favor. And so, after years of denying the rumors, it finally happened. Disney left Celebration. Chapter 6. Celebration without Disney. The signs had been there over the years that Disney was interested in reducing their involvement in Celebration. As mentioned before, the first sign of separation was when they took their name off the water tower. The next was when Celebration disappeared from their park maps in the early 2000s. Disney had already seemingly reduced their involvement with the Celebration School, and was able to slowly transition governance to the various home and commercial owner associations of the town. Then, in 2004, Disney finally sold the town center to Lexan Capital, which would take over maintenance of the town's iconic centerpiece. For some residents, this felt like a rug pull. Many came to Celebration due to their belief in the quality and craftsmanship the Walt Disney Company was known for. Many of those in Celebration were big Disney fans, and wanted to be a part of the company's history as Disney attempted to revolutionize the concept of a modern community. But for many others, these were not the reasons they came to Celebration. Many came for the school, or the seemingly safe and pristine atmosphere of the town. Many wanted a change from the cramped metropolitan lives they had previously led, and some just ended up in Celebration on a whim, being in the right place at the right time. Celebration had a lot of what the internet would call Disney adults, but it also had a lot of people just looking for a change. People moved to places for all kinds of reasons, and so they had a lot of different feelings about Disney leaving. So instead, in my interviews, I wanted to know something else. Was it the negative press and complications that changed their minds, or was Disney planning to leave Celebration from the very beginning?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, that's what every developer wants to do. And that's why the governance structure was set up the way it's set up. And that's not untypical, that a developer will gradually cede power on the board to elected members from the residents, and over time until they reach a point when they've extracted the maximum revenue that they can from the development. They got return on their investment, and then they pull out.
I remember hearing that from early on, that the goal was Disney would embrace this, would throw its vast resources at it, get it up and running, and then turn it over as its own municipality. I was on the original stakeholders board. Disney always planned to leave. From everything I can remember, from serving on that stakeholders committee to being a teacher at the school to being an early member of that community, they always planned to go. There was never always going to be Disney's town. They were going to transition out at some point.
All throughout Celebration's development and existence, Disney was focused primarily on its other larger projects. Things like the canceled Disney's America, Euro Disney, Animal Kingdom, a second gate at the newly renamed Disneyland Paris, and those are just the theme parks. Toy Story, Hercules, Mulan, A Bug's Life, Toy Story 2, Monsters Inc., Lilo and Stitch, Finding Nemo, Pirates of the Caribbean, and The Incredibles were all released from 1995 to 2004. Pixar was revitalizing the success of Disney's movie releases, but disagreements between leadership threatened to end the partnership of the two companies. In 2003, Roy E. Disney, son of Roy Disney and nephew to Walt, resigned in protest of the management strategies of Michael Eisner, and leadership was beginning to shake up. A year after Celebration's town center was sold, Bob Iger would replace Eisner as CEO of the company. Big things were happening at the Walt Disney Company during this time, and to them, Celebration was a small footnote in a storied and tumultuous chapter of the brand. At the same time, Celebration was a complicated project, which dealt with real people living in a real town that Disney was responsible for. It was a unique project, but it was always a side project, and to the company it was becoming more trouble than it was worth. After all, Disney is an entertainment company. Part of the reason Celebration was so closely examined by the press was that, in all honesty, Disney had no business building a town. They make movies and themed entertainment experiences, and Celebration was neither of those things. The same has been said of the Epcot project. It was an idea from a man at the end of his life, wanting to be more than an entertainer. Walt had wanted to be an American pioneer, someone to turn the dial from the past to the future, changing the everyday lives of the people of his country. Despite the marketing, Celebration was not directly inspired by Epcot, and yet it had a similar purpose: to become the next evolution of the American town. It was meant to push us into the future, even if just a little bit. And in the same way, it was meant to bring us back to the past, to be more than just a subdivision or town, but a community built on strong bonds. A type of small town, close-knit community practically lost to time. Epcot was meant to be the great city of tomorrow, but in a way, Celebration was meant to be the great city of yesterday, recapturing neighborly bonds we had lost over the years. Perhaps Disney had no business making Celebration in the first place, and perhaps then it made sense for them to leave their city of yesterday behind in their company's history books. But that's the thing about a community of people. It cannot be owned, bought, or controlled. You can own the government, you may buy the town, and you may control how it looks, but you can't do any of those things to the community. A community is planted when people form a central bond in a central place, and it naturally grows as those people develop culture and history with one another. When I started this documentary, I thought this would be an easy story about a bunch of Disney adults who locked themselves into a failed town that Disney left in the dust. But that's not the story of Celebration. It might be the story you've heard before, but it's not the truth. When I talked to those who had built it, who had lived there, who had worked there, I very quickly realized that these people loved this town. Not because it was Disney's town, but because it was theirs.
My son-in-law was one of the lottery kids.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So how's that for connection? Taught there, lived there, kids went to school there, daughter married a lottery kid. So my son-in-law, Jonathan, he was one of those kids, and he and my daughter met when they were in middle school. And
oh, wow.
Together. Yeah.
That's really cool. So they met in middle school and then got married.
Met in middle school and Celebration. Neither one of them ever dated anyone else. Never. I mean, they went all through Celebration from the time he started there until they graduated from high school.
I was there for the alumni gathering, and 5 or 6 years ago, and I was there a couple of years ago. I've never had this experience, but it's got to be like having a child and then meeting the child, raising the child until they're 2 and then losing them until they're 7 or 8. And and they turned out fine. And it was nice to see. It was very satisfying. It told me that what we did was right, and what we did was smart.
All of this has been about Disney's time in the town, but that's what Celebration was. Now, before we wrap this up, let's move on from the history of the town and talk about Celebration today. Chapter 7: Celebration Today. In exploring the story of Celebration's past, I knew I would eventually have to hop on a plane and see the current state of the town, because Celebration is alive and well, and its story is still unfolding every day. And there are a number of things that have happened in Celebration after Disney sold the town center that are worth diving into. First, let's talk about the state of the community. Celebration was sold as a place where the close-knit community makeup of pre-World War II America was re-established. The question is that still the case? From what I could tell, yes. On my first day in Celebration, they were holding their weekly farmers market, a tradition held since the beginning of the town. I walked through and could see a blend of both residents and tourists exploring the market. I walked around the lake and saw residents both young and old sitting on benches, taking in the scenery. The restaurants on Front Street always seemed to be busy, and I myself enjoyed some chocolate I got from Kilwin's ice cream shop and sat next to the water fountain. That's not to say that things haven't changed since Celebration was founded. Most of the people who were there in the early days seem to have moved on. In Andrew Ross's book, Sunbelt Blues, he explores the housing crisis in America by returning to Osceola County and interviewing those living in motels and on the streets. One couple Andrew ran into at one of the motels were early residents at Celebration, but due to the recession were forced to leave the town. After the recession, prices have generally risen in Celebration, and many companies have bought and rented out homes. This is a far cry from the early days, where generally rentals were exclusively apartments, and homes were usually owned. Celebration is a great case study for a larger wealth disparity in the United States, one clearly visible as soon as you drive outside of the community. The area of Osceola surrounding the town is touristy, and while there are nicer areas and shopping centers, much of it is a bit run down. Celebration was always a bit of a bubble, shielded away from the rest of Osceola, and many of the run-down buildings have been there since the town's founding. But it's hard to point the blame solely at a place like Celebration. After all, the wealth gap in America is a problem found in almost every major city. In the early years, Disney had talked about creating low-income housing to truly make Celebration into the ultimate mixed-income community. They opted instead to send funds to programs supporting low-income residents in Osceola, and made Celebration a middle to upper-class community. And while this is increasingly unlikely to ever change in Celebration itself, Disney recently announced an affordable housing initiative in neighboring Orange County. I took a quick detour up the highway and visited a patch of land Disney has offered for low-income housing. Like Celebration, this land and the area surrounding used to be part of the Reedy Creek District, but was de-annexed to prevent residents from gaining voting rights in Disney's areas. Notably, Disney themselves are not planning to develop the housing. Rather, they've partnered with the Michaels Corporation to handle construction and operation. Opposing voices in the community have raised concerns about the development, one issue being a lack of schools in the area. But if Celebration scared Disney away from one thing, it would probably be building schools. The land itself seems to be a leftover patch of farmland, with a dilapidated barn still sitting on the property. So hopefully this development will allow low-income residents to find stable housing in the region, and more developments like it will be established soon. But back to Celebration itself, because in recent years there have been headlines about the town becoming run down as well, with mold and decay allegedly eating away at the town center. These stories have circulated after the area was sold to Lexan Capital. When Lexan took over the town center, shop owners were assured that the only difference would be a new name on the rent bill. But this has not really been the case. When Lexan bought the property, Disney offered them $750,000 to use for maintenance and repair of the area, but the company declined. Instead, they quickly sold 2 parking lots for condo development, turned some of the more affordable rentals into condos for sale, and later refinanced the town, saddling it with debt so the company could profit as much as possible. Meanwhile, the town has reportedly sunk further into decay, with Lexan not seeming to care enough to do anything until they absolutely need to. As well as that, Disney retains the ability to force Lexington to make those repairs through representatives on Celebration's non-commercial owners board, but they have seemingly yet to do so. Going into Celebration, I had planned to highlight these structural issues and call upon Lexington to do their job and maintain the town. But when I arrived, I was surprised to find that Celebration was beautiful. Really. I had read all about how nice the town was, how unique and impressive the architecture was, and how nice the community was. And honestly, that all remains true. And the fact that I, as a tourist, see very few flaws in the town and its town center is great. But it's also not great, because if the structural problems and repairs needed are all behind the scenes, hidden behind a clean and shiny outer appearance, that means Lexington probably isn't going to do much about it. And that's a big problem. In purchasing the town center, Lexington assumed the responsibility of maintaining the buildings, and therefore the future of Celebration. And it doesn't matter if a tourist like me can readily see the problems. If the problems exist, then it's their responsibility to fix them. And I sincerely hope they do. Now, we've looked at the state of the community, the town center, and the buildings within. Next, let's briefly focus on one of those buildings, the movie theater. Designed by Cesar Pelli, it remains a staple of the town's architecture, with its twin spires piercing the town's skyline. But unfortunately, in December 2010, it closed its doors. And to this day, the iconic theater sits in the center of the town unused. Why did this happen? Well, it was rented and operated by AMC since the town's beginning, known as AMC Celebration 2. Towards the end of the theater's operation, it struggled to attract customers, as seen in these photos from its final day of operation. The closure of the theater was quiet and received little fanfare. Despite its closure, however, AMC continued to rent the location because it was cheaper for them to pay the rent than to operate it. And since they have a nearby location in Disney Springs, they didn't want another company to take over and detract from their sales. That is, until the pandemic hit theaters hard, and AMC was forced to cut costs severely. Because of this, in 2020, they stopped paying rent to the building. No other company or individual has taken over the building yet, but there is a hope from many in the community that this iconic building will one day open its doors again. Next, let's talk about the state of Disney's involvement in the town. Now, hold on, you're probably asking yourself. The last chapter was all about how Disney left Celebration. Well, that's definitely true in a sense. Disney sold the town center, leaving maintenance and upkeep to Lexington. Disney also left the Homeowners Association, meaning they are no longer involved with maintaining the appearance of houses. Ever since their name came off the water tower, they've been wanting to distance themselves from the project. And the perception from most of the people I've talked to is that Disney packed up and left the town. Until I talked to Andrew Ross.
What was not typical about Celebration was that the company retained a veto vote as part of the governance structure. That even after all of the governance boards have been turned over to residents, the corporation can still exercise a veto. That's very unusual. The perception that Disney has left the town a long time ago is a flawed perception. Company still owes chunks of land. I mean, the business plan always was to sell off the land at the highest market value at the right time. And that continues to be the case, but they still own little chunks of land, and especially a large chunk of land that lies to the west of the I-4 corridor, which currently is undeveloped. They still control the commercial the commercial governance board, and effectively they have control over the joint board. Yeah, the company has sort of withdrawn a lot of its imagistic or rhetorical association with the town, but its property stake is still considerable.
My perception had always been that this is Celebration, but it turns out that's only a portion of it. On the other side of the I-4 freeway, this large swath of land is also a part of Celebration, and it is massive. Over 1,000 acres of land, about 2/3 the size of what is developed in the town. Disney has had little areas of commercial land in Celebration for years that they have recently begun to sell off. But at time of recording, they have yet to sell this massive patch of land. Now, their ownership of the land means a couple of things. First, it means they can be involved in the government, according to the rules they outlined when the town was founded. As long as they own more than 10% of the land in Celebration, they're allowed representation on governmental boards in the town, of which there are many. And of course, even if they sell that land, they still retain veto power over any decisions made. Second, it means that more than a third of Celebration has yet to be developed into anything. Most of the land is just a giant forest, and it would be expensive to develop, so it may not be used for anything, at least not for a while. However, their ownership of the land means they are the biggest non-residential landowner, and allows them sway over CNOA, the Non-Residential Owners Board. So by holding onto this land, they can exercise their authority over Lexington. That and the price tag of development are probably the reasons Disney is holding onto the land, and how they are quietly still connected to the town. Even if the land is ever developed, it's on the other side of the freeway, and would likely be seen as separate from the town, even if it would technically still be a part of Celebration. But if Disney ever decided to develop it, and therefore become more involved in the town once again, it would be interesting to see the reactions of residents. After all, Disney has spiritually left the town, and the residents have continued the story of Celebration on their own. So for Disney to reinsert themselves into that story would likely be controversial to those living there. Now, we've covered the community, Lexington, the state of the town center, the movie theater, and Disney's continued involvement. Before we go, let's talk about one final important part of Celebration, its legacy. It's an idea that has persisted all throughout this story, from Walt's obsession with Epcot and designing the future, to Celebration recapturing the community structures of the past. Celebration was sold as a continuation of Epcot, as a final chapter in the history of Walt's final project. But Celebration has its own story, and its own legacy as well, carried on by the residents themselves. I first noticed this in talking to Jackie Flanigan. Jackie highlighted how despite the failure of the original Celebration school, many of its ideas and philosophies made their way into a number of the nearby schools. These included Montessori Academy of Celebration, Neo City Academy, and the Diocese of Orlando.
Again, the influence of the Celebration school design was so prevalent that when I went to work at the diocese years later, I remember having a meeting. We were doing some work on a school, and we went to a meeting with this architectural firm, and they were selling us on, because they were presenting a proposal for some building that they wanted to do for the diocese schools. And they start showing this, and I'm sitting around this big table, and the architects are going through, and they've got these pictures, and they're showing their portfolio. And I looked up and I went, that was my classroom. And the guy looked at me and he's like, what? And I said, that's upper 3 in Celebration school. And it's like that they use that to pitch the way schools should be. I found fascinating.
More than just schooling, the design philosophy of Peter Rummell and his team, as well as the architecture and layout of the town, served as inspiration for a handful of more recent developments. 2 former members of TCC, Charles Adams and Don Killeran, went on to found Celebration Associates, which worked with developers to create a pattern book and design philosophy for master plan communities around the world. As well as that, Brent Harrington, Celebration's first town manager, went on to work as president and CEO of DMB Development, taking his experiences in Celebration and using them in further developments around the country. And as for Disney, after all those years of avoiding the Epcot project, they had finally built a town that kept some of the spirit of Walt's original plan. Celebration was no utopian society, but it was a town built with community at the forefront. And yet, it was far more difficult than they had probably ever anticipated. Celebration had earned them more grief from the press than anything else. And so, while it may have been a success in the long run, Disney distanced themselves from community development. They've been known to build the occasional neighborhood from time to time, but Celebration served as their first and last foray into building communities. Except that is about to change.
We're here in Rancho Mirage to celebrate the groundbreaking of Cotino, our first story living by Disney community.
Together we mark the ground upon which Cotino will be built.
And in addition to residential homes, this development is also expected to host a hotel and a range of shopping, dining, entertainment, and leisure activities, as well as a grand oasis featuring clear turquoise waters with Crystal Lagoons technology.
Cotino is a new community currently being developed by Disney in partnership with Brent Harrington's DMB Associates. It doubles as both a master plan community and mini vacation destination, with offerings including a resort hotel and town center. It will be located in Rancho Mirage, which is near Palm Springs in the California desert. Cotino will have parks and walking trails like Celebration, and even has a lagoon. In fact, if you look at the map, Cotino's master plan is pretty similar to Celebration's. More recently, Disney announced a similar planned community located just outside of Raleigh, North Carolina, called Asteria. Less details are known about this project, as construction has yet to begin and sales probably won't open until 2027. Although there will be houses available for people of all ages, at least some of the residential offerings in both Cotino and Asteria will be reserved for those 55 and older. This seems to indicate that Disney has learned a lot from the successes and failures of their Celebration project. Rather than try to create the next great community of mixed-income residents, Disney is interested in creating communities of a higher price point geared mainly towards retirees. They're not building schools, and they're not trying to reinvent the wheel with community planning. Their plan is to create a nice place to live and make a quick profit off the land sold, as well as generate continual income by charging residents and visitors membership fees for the community's clubhouse. They'll also charge visitors for beachside access to the lagoon for Cotino, providing more additional income. Both Cotino and Asteria are part of an initiative called Story Living, where Imagineers design communities with a Disney touch, meaning if these places are profitable, Disney is planning to make more communities. At the time of my interviews, Asteria had not been announced, but Cotino was in development, and most people I talked to had actually already heard about it. Since they had all been involved in Celebration in one way or another, I was interested to hear if they had any advice for Disney in terms of what they should take from the Celebration project and incorporate into Cotino.
I think that they've got to try and be new and different without being so avant-garde that they make people feel uncomfortable. People have got to feel like it's home, like it's a real place. People don't want to live in a theme park.
So Celebration, if it were started now, it would probably manifest itself differently than it did in 1994 from its beginnings then. And it'll be interesting to watch and see what they do in California. The California market's first very different than the market in Central Florida. So that in and of itself would suggest a different kind of product mix. It would manifest itself differently. People are different. The market's changed.
I'm not going to say don't build a school, because I believe that the heart of every community is its school. It should be. That we've lost that. Undercommit and overdeliver. That would be my advice. You can't sell something that may not exist. And if you're doing something really different, I don't should market it, because if it's that new and that innovative, you don't know that it's going to work.
So I have heard of it, and to answer your question directly, manage expectations. Don't oversell it, or don't let the people that are there selling it oversell it. Make sure that you have some overwatch in what's being said, because these people work on commission. They're going to tell you whatever you want to hear, and they're going to say whatever they need to say to make the sale, because that's their bottom line. And they need to, as a company, if they're going to do it again, they need to make sure that the people that are doing the selling are actually selling the reality of what they're building, and not the fantasy of what some want it to be.
Yeah, I noticed that. I was surprised that they would actually, I thought Celebration would be their first and last foray into residential development. My sense is that the one in California is not being designed as particularly mixed income community. It's fairly high end. So the more risky, I would say, the more risky features of the Celebration blueprint, the mixed income part of it, the school, the public school that was at the heart of it. These are not going to be part of the plan for the new community.
So, in a sense, would you say that Celebration is the first and last time Disney has built a community?
I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to live in Celebration and write about it was that no one really built a new town in the U.S. since the 1960s. I mean, a town with everything, with all the features built in. We're not talking about subdivisions or master plan communities. This was designed as a town, coherent town. And it's not often that developers do that for very good reasons. You have to have very deep pockets to be able to do it. And Disney was able to finance it in that way. That is uncommon. So, again, yeah, there's a difference between building a master plan community and building a new town. New towns are very rare.
Well, it will be interesting to see what happens with all of the new communities Disney is planning down the line. At the end of the day, Celebration was a unique and singular project that was unlike anything the company had ever tried before, and is unlikely to be surpassed by any community they will ever create again. And maybe that's for the best, because Celebration deserves to be more than a footnote in a company's history, or a stepping stone to grander and more profitable community plans. It deserves to be remembered for more than its parallels to the final idea of a visionary creator. It deserves to be remembered as less than a utopia, and more than just nostalgia. Like any place, like any moment, its history is worth preserving, and its history is held by those who created it, those who contributed to it, and those who lived in it. Many of those who have come and gone over the years, but each added their own thread to the tapestry of Celebration's history. A tapestry that holds all the trials and triumphs, all the successes and failures, with threads held strong by the bonds of the community. A community built upon the belief that people could and should be neighborly to one another, living and growing together as one beautiful community. And that's all Celebration is, just a town built for its community. I've dedicated a year of my life to presenting the history and culture of Celebration, and I couldn't have done it without the help of a number of people who I'd like to thank. I'd first like to thank my family, who have been incredibly supportive throughout this whole production. Second, thank you to those who helped me with my research, and to those who took the time to do an interview with me. Thank you to Peter Rummell, Jerry Ray, Jackie Flanigan, Tom Vitale, Bob Rhodes, Rene Castillon, and a very special thanks to Andrew Ross, whose research was vital to the creation of this documentary. If you're interested in learning more about Celebration in Osceola County, I'd highly recommend checking out his books, The Celebration Chronicles and Sunbelt Blues. And to the people of Celebration, after years of negative press, I hope this documentary can serve as a fair account of your history and culture, and as a celebration of you and your community. And finally, if you took the time to watch this film, whether you watched the whole thing, 10 minutes, or just 2 seconds, a very special thanks to you. Thank you.